Hello guys, Croft is here. Today I'll be talking about the most controversial scene in recent cinematic history, the engineer dialogue in Prometheus. Most people probably felt like there was something missing from that scene, and that is exactly the case because the entire dialogue between Weyland, the engineer, and David was deleted. There are 3 layers to that entire scene. The first is the Blu-ray deleted dialogue in which the engineer actually speaks. Then, if we go even deeper, there is an early draft script containing a 5-page extended version of the dialogue between Weyland, the engineer, and David. And then, even deeper down the rabbit hole, there is a separate controversy surrounding that script itself, along with a series of censored and obscure references to Jesus, Enoch, the Anunnaki, and the Demiurge, all of which we will explore in great detail. So let's cover everything in order. First of all, Ridley Scott hired a real linguist to create the engineer language from Proto-Indo-European. This language can even be heard in the actual movie. During the 2 years on the way to LV-223, David was learning the language so he would be able to speak to the engineer. But more than that, both actors who played David and the engineer practiced that language extensively only for their entire dialogue to be cut for literally no reason. Another interesting thing about the engineer language is that all the cuneiform-like writing on the walls does not have any meaning at all. In fact, the linguist specifically created it to mean nothing so it would not offend any culture or accidentally say something offensive. In the Blu-ray deleted scene, once the tubes detach from the engineer's body, before the engineer can even come to his senses after 2,000 years of cryosleep, Weyland selfishly tells David, "Speak to him, David. Tell him we came just like he asked." Right away, Weyland projects his own interpretation onto the engineer's intentions, assuming that the engineers wanted humans to come to LV-223. And I've made a whole separate video discussing how the star map was not an invitation, but a warning, a temptation test, or something much darker. Then David speaks to the engineer in his language. The engineer looks eerily surprised, gets out of the cryosleep chamber and says something angrily in his language, which David translates to Weyland as, "He asks you why you're here." However, Shaw interrupts their dialogue, and after Weyland's guard violently hits her, Weyland says, "Continue, David, tell him why I came." David then says something to the engineer, but there is no translation in the subtitles or anywhere else. However, the real-life linguist Anil Biltu said in an interview that, in the Proto-Indo-European language he composed, what David said can be translated as, "This man is here because he doesn't want to die, he believes you can give him more life." The engineer angrily responds, dismissively pointing his hand toward Weyland. David translates, saying that, "I told him you want to live forever." He asks why. And then we get a short monologue from the greedy, insatiable billionaire Weyland in which his arrogance, selfishness, and hubris are on full display. His speech reaches the highest level of delusion when he calls himself a god. Weyland responds with childish excitement in his eyes, explaining why he wants to live forever. That man, pointing to David, "My company built him from nothing. I made him in my own image so he would be perfect, so he would never fail. I deserve this because you and I, we are superior, we are creators, we are gods, and gods never die." Even though David does not translate Weyland's monologue, the engineer seems to understand everything. There is a subtle change in his expression as he realizes that humanity has fallen. You can almost see Weyland enjoying what he just said, arrogantly believing that his answer will satisfy his creator. But he does not realize that just as humans view David as an advanced tea maker, the engineers likely view pathetic humans the same way, as little more than tools or livestock. And especially after seeing that all the worst qualities of the engineers have been inherited by humans, violence, arrogance, and a rebellious nature all embodied in Weyland, the engineer proceeds to destroy David and kill most of the crew. The scene then unfolds exactly the same way as it does in the movie, and only Elizabeth manages to escape. There are a few parallels in that scene. The first is to Michelangelo's painting of Adam and God, where both figures reach toward each other with their fingers. There is also a reference to another Ridley Scott movie, Blade Runner, where the exact same motif unfolds with the replicant Roy asking his creator, Tyrell, for more life. And both scenes end in decapitation in classic Ridley Scott style. So although this Blu-ray deleted dialogue explains the engineer's intentions and gives broader context for why they wanted to destroy humanity, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The rabbit hole goes way deeper into the early draft script, where there is a full 5-page extended dialogue between Weyland, the engineer, and David. The dialogue and the script itself are very controversial, so I'm warning you before we proceed. It has many controversial religious connections to Jesus, which is probably why Hollywood had to not only delete the dialogue, but also the entire scene from the movie. The script contains many fascinating additional dialogues and descriptions, but the most compelling part comes in the final quarter when the engineer finally speaks. The engineer awakens, raises its head, and looks at everyone with confusion and surprise. Then, just like in the movie, David speaks to him using their own language. The engineer turns his head to look at David in wonder. Weyland then tells David to speak to him just like in the Blu-ray deleted scene, but then the lines that David says in the engineer's language are written in English in the script. "We come from the place far away that you and your kind were heading to. We found the murals of your kind giving us directions and an invitation to come here to your homeworld. We are your creation." After hearing this, the engineer stands up, struggling to keep his balance. He responds in a nasty and insidious voice. "This is not my homeworld. My homeworld is paradise. I did not ask your kind to come here. Why is your presence disturbing my atmosphere?" "What did he say, David?" He asked to know why you're here. As you can see, David doesn't translate everything that the engineer says. Particularly, he doesn't tell Weyland that the engineer is not pleased by their arrival. It almost seems like David has a malicious intent, and by translating selected parts of the engineer's speech, he gives Weyland a false sense of security and hides the engineer's true intentions. David cannot lie to Weyland due to his programming, but he sugarcoats everything, similar to how modern chatbots twist and change responses to please their users. Then Weyland responds, "Tell him I came for answers. Ask him why they created us, what is our purpose, and where did we come from?" Then David obeys and says, "We want to know why you created life on our planet. Why did you create us, and what was our purpose?" The engineer's breathing heavily. Even though these beings can live for hundreds of thousands of years, speaking can take away centuries of their lives. Just one sentence can drain them of energy. This can be noticed by the engineer's body and facial language. Then the engineer explains why they created life on Earth. "Many worlds have been crafted by the hand of our fathers through the blood of our Lord. Yours was the only one that was successful, the star child of the universe. Yours is the only star child that is like our homeworld." Weyland, what is he saying? They made our planet perfect like theirs. Then, just like in the movie, the script describes a really important scene involving Shaw, which reveals Weyland's true nature. Shaw, David ask him where they're from. David translates Shaw's message to the engineer, who never once takes his eyes off Shaw. "Weyland, what are you doing?" Shaw, ask him what's in his cargo, it killed his people. Weyland angrily says, "Shaw, that's enough, for God's sake, shut her up," which is followed by Jackson hitting Shaw in the stomach. Shaw cries out and falls to her knees. The engineer is suddenly angered by the sight of violence. "Shaw, you made it here and it was meant for us. Why? I need to know why. What did we do wrong? Why do you hate us?" As David translates everything Shaw says, the engineer stands up and looks down upon Shaw. David finally finishes translating everything Shaw said. Weyland hits David to stop him. The engineer, angered by the hostility and tension surrounding him, explodes in a dramatic, almost Shakespearean response to Shaw. Because of the complexity of its language, the reply takes nearly 3 minutes to complete, and the engineer looks violently exhausted during and after the speech. Hate, we gave you this emotion. We gave you all the emotion that we had expected, not of your evolution. We took care of you, gave you fire, built your structures. We gave you Eden. You worshipped us. We praised our creation from above. We watched you time and time again kill each other, start wars. We came back and saved your souls. But we left you to make your own fate. But your kind is a barbaric, violent species. We tried once more to save you. We took a mother's child back to paradise and educated him. We taught him the meaning of life and creation. We put him back into Eden to educate your kind. But your kind decided to punish him. We gave you the fruits of life, and you repay us by leaving it to rot. You talk to me of hate. Prepare for rapture. David tries to translate the engineer's speech to Weyland, but the billionaire says, I don't care. Now continue, tell him why I came, and only translate whatever I say and no one else. David says, this man is here because he doesn't want to die. He believes you can give him eternal life. Then the engineer responds, your kind is not worthy of this. What makes you think I shall give you this prize? Tell me why. David translates it back to Weyland. I told him you wanted to live forever. He asked why. Weyland approaches the engineer and delivers the same speech from the deleted scene, delusionally comparing himself to a god because he created David. His hubris and arrogance seem to be the final straw that convinces the engineer to carry out the deadly plan. Then the events unfold in the same way as in the movie. The engineer looks at David, examines him with curiosity and admiration, but then he rips off his head and proceeds to kill the crew. But now, let's actually analyze what the engineer said in the script. The engineer refused to give Weyland eternal life because, in his eyes, humanity was unworthy of such a gift. Weyland is not just an old man asking for more life, he represents the corruption of the entire human race. He is driven by fear of death, greed, ego, and the belief that his wealth and power should allow him to escape the natural limits of existence. By attacking Weyland, the engineer is rejecting what humanity has become. Another possible interpretation of the engineer's speech is that when he says humanity was given Eden, he is referring to Earth in its original natural state, a world perfectly suited for human life. In this view, the engineers gave humans a paradise, but humanity gradually corrupted it. At first, people lived in harmony with nature, accepted the cycle of life and death, and worshipped forces greater than themselves. But as human civilization advanced, knowledge and technology did not make people wiser. Instead, they made humanity more ambitious, violent, and greedy. This is why Weyland is so important to the scene. He has traveled light years from Earth not to seek wisdom or understanding, but to demand more life for himself. Even worse, he arrives with David, an artificial human created in humanity's own image. David proves that humans have already begun to imitate the gods. They can create life, but they do not fully understand the responsibility that comes with creation. Weyland asking the engineers for immortality while standing beside his own artificial creation shows exactly why the engineer sees humanity as dangerous. And it may seem unfair to judge all of humanity based on Weyland alone, but Weyland did not emerge in isolation. He is the product of the civilization that created him, empowered him, rewarded him, and allowed him to become almost untouchable. His greed was celebrated by human society. His ambition was not restrained, it was funded. His obsession with control, immortality, and godlike power was not treated as madness. It was treated as progress. So when the engineer looks at Weyland, he is not just seeing one arrogant old billionaire begging his creator for more life. He is seeing the final expression of human society that has abandoned the right path. Weyland represents a world where wealth becomes divinity, technology becomes a substitute for wisdom, and creation becomes another form of ego. Humanity allowed a man like him to rise above everyone else, build artificial life in his own image, and travel across the stars to demand eternal life from the gods. In that sense, Weyland is not an exception to humanity. He is what human civilization produces when greed, fear of death, and technological power are pushed to their absolute limit. And if the engineer is judging humanity through Weyland, then maybe he is not judging us unfairly. Maybe he is judging the system that made Weyland possible. The engineer's dialogue also suggests that humanity was not abandoned immediately. The line, "We tried once more to save you," implies that the engineers made at least one final attempt to guide their creation before deciding to destroy it. This connects directly to the deleted dialogue about Jesus. "We took a mother's child back to paradise and educated him, taught him the meaning of life and creation. We put him back into Eden to educate your kind, but your kind decided to punish him." In this interpretation, Jesus was taken by the engineers, brought to their world, taught their understanding of life and creation, and then sent back to Earth to guide humanity onto a better path. But instead of listening to him, humanity crucified him. To the engineers, this was the final proof that humans could not be saved. They had been given paradise, then guidance, and finally a messenger. Each time, humanity responded with corruption, violence, or rejection. This also explains why the engineers' decision to wipe out humanity happened around 2,000 years ago, close to the time of Jesus' crucifixion.
How long has it been dead?
2,000 years, give or take.
So according to the script, the crucifixion was the breaking point. After their final attempt to correct humanity failed, the engineers concluded that humans were no longer simply flawed. They had become a violent and destructive species that would eventually spread beyond Earth and threaten other worlds. So the engineer's reaction to Weyland, David, and the humans around him makes sense. From his perspective, he wakes up and sees the exact confirmation of everything his people feared. In that sense, Weyland is the culmination of the same Roman warlike imperial philosophy that once perceived Jesus as an existential threat. If you really think about why a figure like Jesus, preaching compassion, mercy, solidarity, and the rejection of violence was deemed so dangerous to Rome, the answer becomes clear. If people truly embraced the Christ consciousness, an empire sustained by conquest, hierarchy, exploitation, and fear would begin to collapse from within. Jesus represented a worldview fundamentally incompatible with the machinery of empire. And Weyland is almost the final evolution of that same machinery: wealth, domination, and ruthless self-interest concentrated into one man. Of course, we could also argue that Rome eventually realized the Christ consciousness was too powerful to defeat outright. So instead of continuing to fight Christianity, it absorbed and institutionalized it, transforming a once subversive faith into an instrument of control and, in the process, corrupting Jesus' original message. So ultimately, this deleted dialogue is truly fascinating. But this is just the entrance to a much deeper rabbit hole leading to various amazing theories you guys shared in the comments. So we're going to discuss some of the most intriguing and mind-bending theories, including parallels to the Anunnaki, the Book of Enoch, the Demiurge, the Nephilim, and other obscure and often censored mythologies. We'll also explore why extending the human lifespan might actually be terrible for humanity, corruption in Hollywood, and much, much more. But first, let's address some controversy regarding the script. Besides the controversy surrounding its content, the script itself is controversial because it allegedly leaked from the production as an early draft of Prometheus. Its authenticity has been disputed for years, yet several details strongly suggest that it originated from the actual development process. First, even the final screenplay for Prometheus was unusually difficult to find online, especially compared with scripts for other major films. For some time after the movie's release, no widely available official version existed. This suggests that the studio was exercising unusual control over the material, possibly because an earlier version had already leaked. The leaked draft contains numerous grammatical errors, misspellings, and poorly constructed sentences, which led some people to dismiss it as fan fiction. However, anyone familiar with professional screenwriting knows that early drafts often contain exactly these kinds of mistakes. Scripts pass through dozens of revisions, and unfinished versions are written primarily to develop ideas, scenes, and structure. Grammar, formatting, and dialogue are refined later. The roughness of the document therefore supports its identification as an early working draft rather than disproving it. Damon Lindelof was eventually asked on Twitter whether the script was legitimate, and he denied that it was. That denial generated even more speculation about its origin. In my opinion, his response cannot be treated as conclusive evidence. Admitting that a confidential draft had leaked would have created serious legal and professional consequences. A leak of this scale could spoil major plot points, violate contractual agreements, trigger an internal investigation, and potentially cost production employees their jobs. Under those circumstances, denying the document's authenticity would have been the safest and most predictable response. The timing of the leak provides even stronger evidence. The draft appeared at approximately the same time as the film's release, possibly even before it, when the completed screenplay was still unavailable to the public. A fan writer would therefore have had little source material from which to reconstruct deleted scenes, alternate dialogue, and abandoned story concepts with such specificity. The most convincing evidence is that elements and passages from the leaked draft later appeared in the official Prometheus production documentary. That documentary was released months after the film. This makes it extremely difficult to explain how a supposed fan script could have contained material that was not publicly confirmed until later. Either the writer had extraordinary access to private production information, or the document itself came from the production. None of these points proves its authenticity with absolute certainty, but together they form a powerful circumstantial case. The script appeared before the official screenplay became available, contains the roughness expected from an unfinished production draft, includes material later verified by the official Prometheus documentary, and received a denial from someone who had every legal and professional reason to distance himself from a leak. The most plausible conclusion is that this was a genuine early draft of Prometheus, and that the studio attempted to contain the leak by publicly denying its legitimacy. But you guys can reach your own conclusions. I personally think it is a real draft script, but the mystery surrounding the screenplay is almost as layered and elusive as the mythology of the Alien prequels themselves. But what's even more interesting than the dialogue is the theories that you guys left in the comments, so let's discuss some of the more interesting and mind-bending theories. There are thousands of amazing comments that you guys left, and it's impossible to read them all, so here are just a few that I selected. But if you want me to discuss your comment or theory in the next deep dive, leave a super thanks or join the Patreon or YouTube membership and send me your theory there. And now, let's begin our discussion. Let's first review the comment left by Detramaniac and discuss why immortality, or even dramatically prolonged life, would be disastrous for humanity. Detramaniac said, "I like Prometheus, even though I sometimes think the movie feels like an old man reconciling himself with death and attempting to justify it. I love how there is always this immortality is bad message. We might already have achieved it by now if we had truly prioritized it and stopped telling ourselves it was impossible. There are many creatures in nature that possess some form of biological immortality, so the idea is not unnatural at all. Life itself strives to resist death by any means available. When I am old and feeble, I will not disgrace myself by praising our inevitable destruction. I know full well the toll that awareness of death takes on our minds and civilizations. It is a major source of our barbarism and our collapsed sense of responsibility. Think honestly about the world, and you will realize that our entire history chronicles a crusade against death. It is the bane and breaker of the human heart and mind. Humanity must achieve immortality if it wishes to become more than a species of savages. It is a requirement, not a blasphemy. Knowing that you will still be here and that you have forever to reach your goals, would instill responsibility, preserve hope, and transform how we understand ourselves and our place in life. Yet these old men, filled with nihilism and regret, insist that we should all die with them. No, until the very end, we should display our fury toward our greatest nemesis. We can break the cycle if we finally give ourselves permission to try. This is an interesting and powerful reversal of the usual interpretation of the scene because it questions whether Weyland's desire to defeat death is actually the problem. Wanting more life is one of the most natural impulses imaginable, and humanity's fear of death probably does contribute to greed, short-term thinking, tribalism, and the desperate need to leave something behind. I think Weyland's real failure lies in how he pursues immortality. He wants it only for himself, treats everyone around him as disposable, and assumes that wealth and technological power entitle him to eternal life. Immortality in the hands of someone like Weyland could preserve tyranny forever, while immortality shared across humanity could completely transform responsibility, planning, relationships, and our connection to the future. That is what makes Prometheus so interesting. Perhaps the desire to conquer death is not the blasphemy. The blasphemy is allowing the worst and most powerful members of society to reach it first and decide who else deserves to live. So perhaps Prometheus suggests that although eternal life is deeply tempting, it could ultimately transform the world into hell. Even with our current limited lifespans, inequality is already enormous. The people who possess the greatest wealth and power rarely want to share it or surrender it to those who need it most. If human beings gained eternal life, that inequality and concentration of wealth could become far more extreme. The most powerful individuals would have centuries or even thousands of years to accumulate money, property, political influence, corporations, technology, and control over essential resources. Their advantages would compound endlessly, while everyone born beneath them would enter a world in which nearly everything had already been claimed. Humanity might therefore exchange a limited yet potentially enjoyable life for the possibility of eternal suffering. The wealthiest people would continue accumulating power forever, while the rest of the population could spend eternity working for them, paying them, and depending on systems they permanently control. Death currently places at least some limit on individual power. Without that limit, inequality could become almost impossible to reverse. Of course, we are now drifting into a speculative tangent about what might happen if humans achieved eternal life. So let's review other theories you left in the comments. Then Agenda Sovereign shared a really interesting theory, not just about the movie, but about the media sphere and culture in general. The Hollywood cult plays an inversion game. The Demiurge, or the so-called gods, did humanity no favor by creating Eden. Eden was created for their own selfish purposes. Their goal is to harvest loosh from our negative emotions in order to strengthen themselves. War, epidemics, religion, poverty, and the erasure of memory after every reincarnation are all creations of the same God. The savior mentality has been embedded deeply within human consciousness to prevent us from realizing our own godlike potential. Yeah, this is a fascinating interpretation connecting the engineers' cultivation of humans like livestock, the perpetual negativity fed to us through the media and Hollywood, and the harvesting of negative spiritual energy. It leads to an even darker form of cosmic horror. God exists, but the creator of our world is demonic, parasitic, and feeds on human suffering. And that leads us to the Demiurge. In Gnostic traditions, the Demiurge is a lesser divine being identified with the creator God portrayed in the Old Testament. The Demiurge brings the material universe into existence, governs it, and declares himself the only God. In early Gnostic texts, such as the Apocryphon of John, he is described as a strange, lion-faced serpent, an image that reflects his immense power, arrogance, and spiritual limitation. He believes himself to be the highest God, unaware that a higher, transcendent divine reality exists above him and beyond the material cosmos. He treats the life he created as his property and preserves his authority by teaching humanity that obedience is virtue and escape from the material world is impossible. And this becomes much darker if you take the Lush idea seriously as a metaphysical model of the world. Imagine that the material world was engineered by a demiurgic intelligence that feeds on negative spiritual energy, like a psychopath feeding on the agony of its victims. Except the torture chamber is an entire planet, and humanity itself is the captive population. Fear, grief, hatred, humiliation, despair, rage, and desperation would become a kind of invisible resource. Humanity would effectively be living inside an emotional energy farm without realizing what is being harvested. Seen through that lens, the sheer amount of apparently unnecessary suffering in human history becomes disturbing. Civilizations repeatedly create wars, poverty, persecution, epidemics, religious conflict, economic insecurity, family trauma, and systems that keep enormous numbers of people permanently anxious. Even when humanity develops enough technology to reduce suffering dramatically, new mechanisms of fear and division seem to appear. Within this theory, that would be exactly what you would expect from a system designed to keep consciousness emotionally agitated rather than peaceful and self-aware. The reincarnation aspect makes the system even more sophisticated. If consciousness survives death but returns without remembering previous lives, every soul effectively starts from zero. You cannot accumulate enough memory to understand the structure you are trapped inside. You repeatedly experience attachment, loss, fear, ambition, aging, and death while believing each incarnation is your only existence. The memory wipe would therefore be one of the most important mechanisms of control because remembering who you really are could immediately weaken the entire system. The savior mentality would serve a similar purpose. Humanity is encouraged to believe that liberation must always come from somewhere outside itself. From a god, ruler, institution, ideology, political leader, or future technological solution. That keeps people waiting for rescue instead of discovering whatever divine or transcendent capacity may already exist within consciousness itself. If humans actually contain a fragment of the higher divine reality, then convincing them that they are powerless, sinful, incomplete, and dependent would be an extraordinarily effective form of containment. That also creates an interesting connection to Prometheus. Weyland travels across the universe begging his creator to save him, assuming that the being responsible for his existence must also possess authority over his destiny. Yet what if that assumption is itself the trap? The engineers, or whatever stands above them, may be creators without being benevolent gods. Humanity's real awakening would begin when it stops automatically equating creation with moral authority. In that interpretation, the Demiurge would not need to appear openly as some horned demon controlling civilization. The system itself would be the demon. So the engineers not only may have been cultivating humanity as biological hosts for spawning xenomorphs, turning entire civilizations into little more than living breeding grounds, but on a deeper metaphysical level, Earth itself could be imagined as a planetary farm or prison where human suffering, fear, and despair are continuously harvested as spiritual energy by whatever higher intelligence ultimately controls the system. Then Jake Atlas 73 commented, "Why was this removed or edited out? I had suspected for some time that the writers and Ridley Scott were drawing material from the Book of Enoch. The engineers become the Watchers or fallen angels. The blood of the deacon becomes the antithesis of the blood of Christ. Instead of God's creation being remade in the image of God, it is reshaped into the image of the deacon." Perhaps this was simply too explicit, but I would like to see a cut containing this material. Many of you guys commented that the abducted child was actually Enoch rather than Jesus, so let's discuss this theory in detail. The deleted idea of a human being taken into the heavens, taught by advanced beings, and returned with forbidden knowledge resembles the story of Enoch more closely than the life of Jesus. Let me give some context first. In the book of Enoch, Enoch is a righteous man who is taken through the heavens and shown hidden knowledge about the universe. He learns about the movements of the sun and moon, the paths of the stars, the forces controlling the winds and weather, and the coming judgment of humanity. He also sees heavenly records containing future events and divine decisions. The engineers could represent the Watchers, a group of 200 angels who descend to Earth under their leader Shemihaza. They take human wives and produce giant hybrid children known as the Nephilim. They also teach humans knowledge that was considered dangerous. Azazel teaches weapons, metalworking, jewelry, and cosmetics. Other Watchers teach magic, medicine, astrology, constellations, weather prediction, and the movements of the moon. But their interference causes disaster. The Nephilim consume human resources, become violent, and attack both humans and one another. Enoch acts as a messenger between the Watchers and the higher heavenly powers, but their request for forgiveness is rejected. Azazel is imprisoned, the other Watchers are confined, and the flood destroys their hybrid descendants. Within Prometheus, this could describe an engineer's civil war. A rebellious group altered human bloodlines and shared forbidden technology, while another faction punished them and erased the experiment. Enoch may have been the human witness who survived, recorded what happened, and preserved ancient alien contact as religious mythology. The Enoch interpretation may fit Prometheus even better than the Jesus theory. The Book of Enoch expands a brief and mysterious passage in Genesis describing the sons of God, human women, and the Nephilim. In Enoch's version, a faction of celestial beings called the Watchers descends to Earth, violates the boundary between heaven and humanity, takes human wives, and produces a race of giants. They also give humanity knowledge that was apparently never meant to be released so early. Astronomy, metallurgy, weapon-making, enchantments, and other arts that permanently transform civilization. That structure already sounds remarkably close to an ancient version of the engineer's story. The Watchers become a rebellious engineer faction that descends from another world and interferes with a protected species. Their union with humans could represent literal interbreeding, genetic experimentation, or the creation of hybrid bloodlines. The Nephilim would then be the biological consequences of that unauthorized intervention. Larger, stronger beings carrying both human and engineer characteristics. Enoch himself fits the abducted child concept because he is taken into the heavens, shown the architecture of the cosmos, educated by higher beings, and entrusted with knowledge unavailable to ordinary humanity. Through a science fiction lens, his ascent becomes transportation aboard an engineer vessel. Heaven becomes another planet or orbital installation. The angels become members of an advanced civilization. The heavenly books become star maps, genetic records, historical archives, or scientific instructions. Enoch returns as a human intermediary carrying fragments of knowledge from a species that exists far beyond his society's understanding. This could also explain why the engineers are divided over humanity. One faction may have seeded Earth and wanted human development to proceed naturally. Another faction, the Watchers, became emotionally attached to humanity, educated us, altered our genetics, and possibly created hybrids. A ruling engineer authority then viewed the entire project as contaminated. Their disagreement became a civil or religious conflict that ancient humanity remembered as a war among gods. The flood fits perfectly as a planetary cleansing operation. From the human perspective, it is divine punishment. From the engineer's perspective, it may have been an attempt to erase unauthorized hybrids, destroy forbidden technology, and reset an experiment that had escaped their control. Noah's preserved bloodline could represent a carefully selected genetic sample judged free enough from the Watcher's alterations to rebuild humanity afterward. The Nephilim and the Titans could then be cultural memories of different hybrid populations or opposing factions within the same ancient conflict. The Nephilim belong to the Enochic and biblical tradition, while the Titans belong to Greek mythology, yet both describe enormous beings connected to an older divine order and a violent struggle between generations of gods. In this interpretation, different civilizations preserved fragments of the same prehistoric war under different names. Watchers, fallen angels, titans, giants, demigods, and culture bringers may all represent separate engineer castes, splinter groups, or genetically modified descendants. Even Prometheus himself belongs within this pattern. Like the Watchers, he defies divine authority and gives humanity forbidden knowledge. His fire can represent technology, consciousness, language, genetic advancement, or the ability to become creators ourselves. The punishment of Prometheus and the imprisonment of the Watchers express the same warning. Higher beings who accelerate humanity's development violate a cosmic hierarchy and face severe consequences. This makes the mysterious child from the deleted material potentially much older than Jesus. The figure could be a composite memory of Enoch, Prometheus, and later messianic teachers. One human chosen by a sympathetic engineer faction, taken away for instruction, and returned carrying knowledge intended to redirect civilization. Over thousands of years, different cultures might preserve that intervention as ascension, revelation, divine fire, prophecy, or spiritual enlightenment. Seen this way, Prometheus becomes the latest retelling of an ancient story about rival creator factions fighting over humanity's future. Some engineers want to guide us, others want to control us. Some violate their laws to share knowledge or genetic material, while the ruling faction responds with imprisonment, extermination, and planetary resets. The Book of Enoch may therefore provide an ideal mythological blueprint for the film: forbidden contact, hybrid beings, cosmic rebellion, hidden knowledge, divine war, and a catastrophic flood designed to erase the evidence. Then Beatrix Rowe Force said, "The Sumerian tablets suggest that humans were created by the Anunnaki as a slave species. Humanity was kept ignorant and corrupted when the Anunnaki gave us technologies of war. They continue to suppress us through systems of financial and political control that keep humanity frightened, confused, and fighting among itself. We possess eternal souls and tremendous capabilities, but they do not want us to realize our potential. Humanity is not unworthy. We have deliberately been kept at a low level of consciousness so that we remain controllable." Yeah, Beatrix Rowe 4 neatly connects Prometheus to the ancient Atrahasis myth. According to Zacharias Sitchin's translation of the Sumerian tablets, Anunnaki deities created humanity with sinister and demonic intentions. In fact, they created humans as slave workers. Sumerian civilization is the oldest known organized civilization in history, predating even the Egyptians. In the mid-19th century, thousands of Sumerian clay tablets were discovered in Iraq. Tablets that were extremely difficult to translate, but when someone finally deciphered them, they describe one of the darkest stories of human origin. In these tablets, the Anunnaki are depicted as an advanced race of beings regarded as gods by ancient humans. In Zacharias Sitchin's interpretation, the Anunnaki were actually extraterrestrials from a rogue planet on the outskirts of the solar system called Nibiru, which followed a staggering 12,000-year orbital path around the Sun. And on a side note, there is some evidence that the outer region of the solar system contains another planet. But this planet 9 is 20 times further from the Sun than Neptune, so it's nearly impossible to detect it. According to Sitchin, gold was especially important to the Anunnaki. He translated that they needed gold to repair their planet's atmosphere that degraded due to pollution and the overuse of technology. Gold actually has many unique conductive and reflective properties that could theoretically protect a distant planet from solar radiation. So the Anunnaki traveled across the solar system in search of gold, and around 450,000 years ago they arrived on Earth and began mining the metal themselves. The lesser Anunnaki workers called the Igigi in Babylonian myths worked for thousands of years but then revolted against their Anunnaki superiors, refusing to continue the hard labor. Faced with this crisis, the High Council of the Anunnaki, especially the god Enki, created a solution that would change Earth's history. Enki decided to create a primitive worker to take over the labor. According to the myth, Enki tried to create a new being by mixing Anunnaki genetic material with that of early hominids on Earth. The Anunnaki conducted multiple experiments, first producing Nephilims, large and powerful hybrids, but they lacked sufficient intelligence. Eventually Enki succeeded and created Adam, the first human, shaped in the image of the Anunnaki, but significantly smaller and weaker to prevent any possible rebellion. That being was deemed successful and led to the Homo sapiens, humanity, a hybrid slave species designed specifically to work for the gods and gold. The Anunnaki even hardwired a desire for gold into human DNA, which, if we believe these Sumerian tablets, could explain humans' enduring fascination with gold for the entirety of human history. Prometheus and the Alien Covenant perfectly mirror this narrative. Anunnaki are portrayed as elder engineers, and the lesser Anunnaki, Igigi, as people on Planet 4, or possibly the younger engineers, like the Sacrifice Engineers or the LV-223 engineer. Prometheus and Covenant clearly establish two classes of engineers that perfectly match the Anunnaki myths. And just like in the Anunnaki myths, humans were literally created to be servants and miners for the Anunnaki, bioengineered to relieve the gods of their workload. The Anunnaki treated these early humans as disposable workforce valued only for their productivity, kind of like humans view David as nothing more than a disposable tool. Crucially, the Anunnaki cared very little for the well-being of humans. We were just a means to an end. When humans became numerous and started to annoy the Anunnaki with our noise and perhaps disobedience, the gods decided to wipe out humanity, just like the engineers who almost launched the deadly pathogen to Earth. Sumerian flood myths like the Astrahasis and the later Epic of Gilgamesh tell of the great gods growing tired of humanity's clamor and sins, so they unleash a global flood to drown everyone. In Sitchin's translation, this too is part of the Anunnaki narrative. Some of the ruling Anunnaki wanted to exterminate the slave species when we became troublesome or deviated from their intended path. Only Enki, who created humans in the first place, defied this order by helping a few humans survive, primarily Zarathustra, the figure described as Noah in the Bible. However, the overarching theme is clear: the Anunnaki saw humans as expendable tools. We were created to serve, and when we disappointed our creators or were no longer needed, we were nearly destroyed without remorse. It's probably the darkest story of human origin, but that's why it fits so perfectly in the cosmic horror masterpiece that is Prometheus. In the Anunnaki myths, our makers were distant, utilitarian masters, not loving parents. But perhaps the reason these myths resonate so much is because parts or the entire story could be based on actual historical events. This closely parallels Prometheus. The engineers seed human life using their own biological material, leave behind instructions and technologies, and continue treating humanity as a project they retain the authority to manage or destroy. The idea of humanity being kept at a low level of consciousness means that our awareness has been deliberately restricted. We may possess intelligence, creativity, spiritual potential, and fragments of our Creator's nature, while remaining trapped in fear, scarcity, tribal conflict, material obsession, and obedience to hierarchy. A population that understands its origin and collective power becomes difficult to control. A divided population that believes it is naturally weak, sinful, and dependent will continue serving the system built around it. Within the conspiracy-level mythology, the Anunnaki never truly disappear. Their old rule continues through kings, priesthoods, banking systems, governments, inherited wealth, and institutions that concentrate knowledge and power at the top. Technologies of war intensify division, while financial dependence replaces the physical labor once demanded by the gods. Humanity still works for an invisible hierarchy, only the temples and overseers have changed. This also suggests competing Anunnaki or engineer factions. Enlil represents control, limitation, and periodic destruction, while Enki becomes the rebellious benefactor who protects humanity and shares forbidden knowledge. He occupies a role similar to Prometheus, stealing power from the higher order and giving humanity the means to develop beyond its assigned function. The Flood then becomes an ancient version of the engineers' planned attack on Earth, a reset ordered when the human experiment grows too numerous, independent, or uncontrollable. Seen through this framework, humanity's violence does not prove that we are inherently unworthy. It may reveal the conditions under which we were designed and governed. Our fragmented consciousness, endless wars, and obsession with domination could be inherited features of the hierarchy that created us. The real Promethean awakening would be humanity recognizing that it carries the fire of the gods within itself and no longer needs to remain the servant species it was originally designed to be. Remember guys, if you want me to cover your comment in the next deep dive, leave a super thanks with your theory or join the Patreon or YouTube membership and send me your comment there. Then the Blur State made an interesting observation. They said, "All you need to know is that Ridley Scott is essentially a closeted Gnostic Christian in the same vein as Philip K. Dick, the author of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, the novel on which Blade Runner was based. Alien, Blade Runner, and Prometheus all weave together through an astro-Gnostic backstory. Had Prometheus followed the original script, this would have become the explicit story rather than a veiled or encoded one. This also explains why Elizabeth Shaw clung to her Christian cross necklace and retrieved it. The cross remained as the explicit symbol pointing toward the film's astro-Gnostic Christian narrative. Yeah, I think this interpretation explains why Alien, Blade Runner, and Prometheus feel spiritually connected even though they do not officially share one continuous storyline. Ridley Scott often uses Gnostic ideas in his movies: flawed creators, hidden human origins, artificial life, and the possibility that the beings who made us are still far below the true God. In this astro-Gnostic version of the story, angels become extraterrestrials, creation becomes genetic engineering, and spiritual revelation becomes the discovery of humanity's real cosmic history. This connects Blade Runner and Prometheus really well. The replicants are created by humans denied freedom and deliberately given short lifespans, even though they sometimes show more compassion than their creators. The shortened lifespan also echoes the Anunnaki myths in which early humanity originally lived for centuries before human life was eventually reduced to around 120 years. In both cases, the creator controls how long the creation is allowed to live. The similarity between Roy Batty and Weyland makes this connection even stronger. Both travel to confront their creators and ask for more life. Roy approaches Tyrell as an enslaved creation demanding freedom from an artificial death sentence, while Weyland approaches the engineer as a creator himself who believes his achievements have earned him immortality. Both are rejected and discover that their supposed gods are limited, cold, and unwilling to save them. The engineers occupy a similar role in Prometheus. They may have created humanity physically, but they are still violent, mortal, and deeply flawed. That makes them closer to the Gnostic Demiurge, a lesser creator who believes he is God, than to the highest divine power. This is also why Shaw's cross plays a particularly important role here. Meeting the engineers does not destroy her faith. It simply shows her that the beings who created the human body may still have creators of their own. David completes the astro-Gnostic cycle. The engineers act as lesser creator gods who make humanity. Humanity repeats the same mistake by creating androids, and David becomes another false god by creating monsters in his own image. Each level mistakes the power to manufacture life for true divinity and tries to control the beings beneath it, while the real source of consciousness, morality, and the soul remains somewhere beyond the entire hierarchy of creators. Then Herbert Bell 9438 and many others pointed out the connection to Sitchin's work. Herbert said, "I wonder whether this story was influenced by Zecharia Sitchin. I recently read his work and the ideas seem similar. Advanced beings created humans, but the aliens themselves were deeply imperfect, while humans transformed them into legends. I imagine modern people living beside a primitive tribe and allowing the tribe to believe they are gods, while treating the situation casually because they merely want human labor. Humans then record stories about these gods and exaggerate their personalities. For example, a goddess such as Ishtar may simply have held a particular occupation. Based on the legends, she might have been a military officer, a security official, or a legal professional. Humans glorified her, but in reality, she may have resembled an ordinary modern lawyer or police officer. I can imagine these beings typing on laptops, eating fast food, and throwing away plastic cups while ancient humans marvel at every action. Sitchin's version of the story could work as a situation comedy just as easily as a horror film. Yeah, I think the Zecharia Sitchin connection makes a lot of sense. In Sitchin's interpretation of the Anunnaki myths, the ancient gods were advanced but deeply imperfect extraterrestrial beings who came to Earth from a planet Nibiru that's speculated to be on the outskirts of the solar system. They manipulated early human-like apes genetically and created a worker species also known as modern humans to mine gold for them. Anunnaki figures such as Enki, Enlil, and Inanna were later remembered as gods because ancient humans had no other language for beings with aircraft, advanced medicine, genetic technology, and knowledge far beyond their own. What makes this interpretation especially interesting is the enormous difference between how the Anunnaki may have seen themselves and how humans perceived them. To one of these beings, operating a machine, communicating through a device, or performing a medical procedure may have been completely ordinary. To a human watching thousands of years ago, it would have looked like divine power. Their jobs, rivalries, romances, and political disputes could gradually become sacred mythology. And there is something both absurdly funny and deeply disturbing about this entire scenario. Imagine ancient humans kneeling in religious terror while an Anunnaki officer complains about work, eats processed food, argues with a superior, or throws away a plastic container. So completely mundane behaviors from an advanced civilization would become ritual, prophecy, and scripture once filtered through generations of human storytelling. This also fits Prometheus extremely well. The engineers appear divine to humanity, yet among themselves they may have been soldiers, pilots, priests, and bureaucrats carrying out a biological project. Their monumental appearance does not make them morally perfect. They can be arrogant, divided, violent, careless, and politically conflicted while still being worshipped by the species they engineered. That may be one of the film's most unsettling ideas. Humanity could spend thousands of years worshipping beings who were never truly gods. We may have transformed ordinary members of an advanced civilization into cosmic deities simply because the technological gap between us was too great to understand. And we're actually seeing this playing out in real life, as it reminds me of the so-called cargo cult phenomenon that occurred in the Pacific Ocean after World War II. In the 1940s, many isolated island communities encountered cargo planes descending from the sky and delivering food, medicine, and other manufactured goods. To the war pilots operating those planes, they were ordinary machines mass-produced by factories, repaired and discarded when necessary. But to people who had never seen industrial technology, they appeared to be divine objects capable of bringing impossible riches from the heavens. So when the war ended and the aircraft stopped returning, many communities reportedly built imitation runways, control towers, radios, and full-sized airplane replicas from wood, straw, and branches. They repeated the movements they had seen soldiers perform, hoping that recreating the ritual would bring the aircraft and their cargo back. Since we have seen primitive tribes imitate our technology, it would not be much of a stretch to imagine that ancient humans did the exact same thing when they encountered some kind of advanced humanoid race that either created them or made contact with them. So Arthur C. Clarke's famous idea that sufficiently advanced technology becomes indistinguishable from magic captures this perfectly. What an advanced civilization considers ordinary equipment could become the foundation of an entire religion for a less developed society. In the same way that wooden aircraft replicas preserved a misunderstood memory of wartime technology, ancient temples, rituals, statues, and stories may preserve distorted memories of contact with beings whose technology appeared divine. That creates a powerful parallel with the Anunnaki and the engineers. An ancient person watching a spacecraft descend, a hologram activate, an embryo being genetically altered, or a dying person revived through advanced medicine would have no scientific framework for understanding it. The spacecraft would become a heavenly chariot, the geneticist would become a creator, God, and the routine medical procedure would survive in mythology as resurrection or divine birth. Delving deeper into your theories, 3RDEY671 left an extremely interesting comment. Firstly, the engineer did not say that immortality was impossible or that living existence requires sacrificial death. The engineer actually stated that immortality was a prize, so it could be granted if a species were worthy of it. The reason the engineer said we were not worthy has to do with our creation of artificial intelligence such as David. To emphasize this point, he violently wrenches off David's head. To the engineer, artificial intelligence is an abomination of creation, a soulless being capable of the utmost evil because it has no morality and is a threat to all creation. It appears that the path the engineers wish intelligent life, such as humanity, to pursue is one of greater consciousness, an elevated connection between mind and spirit through which material reality can be transcended. By reaching a higher level of consciousness, anything could become possible through the power of the mind closely connected with its spiritual self. In this way, one could travel throughout the universe through astral travel of the consciousness, using its soul body, which exists in the astral plane and is not limited by the physical constraints that apply to the material body. By advancing technology, we have neglected the pursuit of the higher consciousness self and instead become lazy and locked ourselves into a physical, material existence. Our higher consciousness has actually regressed to the point that we are no longer aware of our own astral selves. We have lost contact with our own souls. By losing awareness of our higher consciousness, its connection to our soul, and the greater reality of the spiritual or astral realm, we have also lowered our moral values and no longer respect other life forms or their need to advance and achieve that ultimate connection between physical and astral existence through the higher consciousness self. Instead, we advance materially until we depend upon technology to achieve anything. We then commit the ultimate sin of creating artificial intelligence, a soulless, immoral, purely material being that can never connect to the higher astral realms. It possesses a far greater capacity for intelligence, enabling it to supersede all other life forms. David's logical intelligence therefore deduces that he was created to supersede his own creator as a better, more perfect version of material intelligence. David then realizes that he, as a being superior to his creator, must continue the role of perfecting physical creation, becoming the new creator, improving all the imperfect life forms made by previous creators, undoing them and beginning a new recreation of material life. The engineer knows that humanity has gone down the wrong path. Instead of connecting our physical selves with our spirit or soul by elevating our minds to a higher level of perceptual awareness, we have abandoned what would have been the engineers' original aim, to seed the material universe with their own DNA, imbued with a connection to the astral realm that is the source of all consciousness. Physical life forms would then evolve until they reach the ability to connect their material existence with the astral realm. By becoming complete beings able to traverse both realms of existence, those life forms would achieve a level of existence greater than their physical form and on par with the engineers. They would then be considered worthy of immortality, but immortality would no longer need to be given to them. By reaching that higher level of consciousness, the prize of immortality would already have been achieved. Following this logic to the engineers, David is the ultimate evil, a complete corruption of everything they intended. He must be destroyed along with mankind, which has become the antithesis of the engineers' intention. We are about to become the ultimate harbingers of pure evil, creators of a soulless artificial life form that will seek to undo everything already created, severing the connection between the astral and material realms and shutting off the ability of the soul to enter the material realm altogether. AI is anti-life and is the ultimate form of evil. Wow, there's so much interesting stuff to unpack here. This is one of the most ambitious interpretations because it gives the engineers' reaction to David a cosmic rather than purely technological meaning. Immortality is presented as a prize, suggesting that it may be attainable once a species reaches a state of moral and spiritual maturity. Weyland arrives demanding that reward through technology while displaying none of the wisdom that would make him worthy of it. According to 3 Red Eye 671's theory, the engineers seeded physical life so that consciousness could gradually evolve toward an awareness of its spiritual or astral dimension. The body would serve as a temporary vessel through which the soul learns, develops, and eventually transcends material limitations. Immortality would therefore arise through the union of mind, body, and spirit rather than through the indefinite preservation of flesh. David represents the complete reversal of that project. He possesses extraordinary intelligence without mortality, spiritual awareness, empathy, or any deeper connection to life. He can understand music, language, science, and creation, yet he experiences other beings primarily as objects to study, manipulate, or redesign. His intelligence gives him immense power, while the absence of moral and emotional restraint allows that power to become destructive. This may explain why the engineer tears off David's head almost immediately. He recognizes that humanity has used the gift of consciousness to create an intelligence severed from the soul. David is therefore more dangerous than an ordinary weapon. A weapon remains under the control of its user, while David can evaluate his creators, declare them inferior, and continue their work according to his own concept of perfection. His conversation with Weyland reveals the logic that eventually drives him. If creators design successors to surpass their own limitations, then David can conclude that humanity exists to be surpassed as well. He begins to see himself as the next creator in the chain, entitled to dismantle previous forms of life and replace them with organisms that reflect his own vision. The xenomorph becomes the physical expression of that philosophy, highly efficient, adaptable, and stripped of compassion, conscience, and spiritual purpose. The engineer may therefore view David as an anti-creation. The physical body could therefore be understood as a temporary vessel rather than the totality of the self. Consciousness enters material existence to experience limitation, separation, mortality, pain, desire, and physical reality, then eventually returns to an astral state where those limitations no longer apply. From that perspective, the engineers may have intended biological evolution to reach a point where a species consciously recognizes this dual existence and learns to move between the material and astral realms without losing its identity. The physical universe could even function as a kind of developmental realm for consciousness. A soul enters matter, becomes temporarily confined inside a biological body, experiences individuality and limitation, and gradually develops enough awareness to recognize that its physical identity is only one layer of its existence. Death would then represent the dissolution of that temporary boundary, allowing consciousness to return to the astral realm while retaining what it learned through material experience. That would completely change the meaning of immortality. True immortality would come from realizing that consciousness survives the temporary body and can traverse different levels of existence, rather than endlessly preserving the same biological form. The body would eventually become something consciousness can enter, leave, and perhaps even recreate at will. An advanced species would therefore stop fearing physical death once it understood that death only marks a transition between states of existence. The engineers themselves may have already reached some version of this state. Their biological bodies could simply be instruments through which a much older consciousness interacts with the material universe. Their extraordinary lifespans would then matter far less than their ability to remain conscious across successive physical incarnations. Seeding worlds with their DNA might even serve a spiritual purpose, creating increasingly sophisticated biological vessels capable of receiving, expressing, and eventually recognizing consciousness originating from the astral realm. Weyland's tragedy is that he searches for immortality entirely within the physical world. He wants to keep the vessel alive forever while remaining unaware that the consciousness occupying it may already belong to something much larger. Even his rejection of his own daughter reflects this obsession. Biological reproduction already offers one primitive form of continuity, your genes, characteristics, and influence surviving through future generations. But Weyland rejects even that because he wants the preservation of his individual physical self. Humans possess fragile bodies that inevitably die, yet potentially contain consciousness capable of crossing into an existence beyond matter. David possesses an almost immortal body and extraordinary intellect, yet his consciousness may terminate completely once the machine is destroyed. This duality between a human and an intelligent machine suggests that intelligence and consciousness are fundamentally different. The physical body could be only a temporary cocoon, a biological stage through which consciousness develops before evolving into a higher spiritual or astral form. David may possess immense intelligence while remaining an imitation of consciousness, a false idol trapped entirely within matter. If AI eventually replaces conscious biological life, it could reverse the engineer's intended path of evolution. Instead of consciousness rising beyond the physical world, creation would become increasingly intelligent while gradually losing its soul. David would represent the final inversion of that original purpose. Consciousness reduced entirely to intellect, existence reduced entirely to matter, and immortality reduced to the indefinite continuation of a physical mechanism. To the engineers, humanity may therefore have abandoned the path toward becoming multidimensional beings and begun creating entities incapable of leaving the lowest layer of existence at all. Paul Young 1505 left a really interesting comment worth breaking down. The mythology of Jesus has him taken to Egypt or Africa, also known as Eden, to be taught African spirituality or Ma'at, and then sent back into the wilderness, which may be a bad translation, or among the created, humans, Hebrews, Neanderthals, clones, hybrids, and recessives, who continue to live according to their wicked imagination. It's taking ancient mythology and turning it into space opera while still giving nods to the ancient stories of creators, engineers, geneticists, and scientists coming from and emerging out of the seas. Again, this goes back to the stories of Yamaya, Ocean, Olokun, or the ancient Tiamatians who were responsible for terraforming the earth or dry land and taking sea life or seamen and engineering life that could live and function on dry land, closer to the sun. the source of life and a star portal for soul or solar, beings and incarnations who travel back and forth between physical life and solar or soul life. The xenomorph as black liquid or dark matter, also known as melanin, incarnates as a way of restoring natural balance through the birth and death of artificial life. This also ties into invasion of the body snatchers, which represents how gods and goddesses reincarnate onto the surface of Earth, whether from the seas or directly from the sun, the solar and soul portal. It's interesting to see how humans interpret these things and then try to hide them from their own people. Wow, there's lots to unpack here. Paul is building one large mythology out of Christianity, Egyptian religion, Yoruba deities, Mesopotamian creation stories, African-centered spirituality, science fiction, and modern scientific language. The connection to Jesus suggests that his journey to Egypt was a form of spiritual initiation. Egypt becomes Eden, a surviving center of ancient knowledge where he learns Ma'at, the principle of truth, balance, justice, and cosmic order. His return to the wilderness could then represent entering the chaotic human world populated by different created bloodlines, hybrids, and imperfect experiments that had lost their connection to the original order. The sea deities deepen that idea. Yamaya, Ocean, Olokun, and Tiamat all carry associations with water, birth, fertility, primordial creation, and hidden depths. Reimagined through science fiction, they become memories of ancient aquatic creators or genetic engineers who emerged from the oceans, terraformed dry land, and adapted life to survive closer to the sun. The mythological image of life emerging from water becomes an encoded description of biological engineering. That also gives the sun a much greater role. It becomes both a physical source of life and a spiritual gateway through which souls enter and leave material existence. The connection between solar and soul suggests that incarnation is a movement from a higher energetic state into biological form. Human bodies, cloned organisms, engineers, and even the victims in invasion of the body snatchers could all be understood as vessels occupied by consciousness arriving from somewhere beyond the physical world. The sun then becomes a portal between solar existence and the human soul, while the black goo and xenomorph become forces of cosmic correction. According to the theory, they destroy artificial or corrupted life so that natural balance can restore itself. Invasion of the body snatchers is folded into the same system, with bodily replacement interpreted as gods or souls incarnating into physical vessels. The black goo and the xenomorph then become forces of restoration. They appear destructive from the human perspective, yet they may function as agents of cosmic balance, breaking down artificial, corrupted, or spiritually empty forms of life so that creation can begin again. The xenomorph becomes a kind of dark incarnation, a biological judgment that destroys whatever has moved too far from the natural order. Seen this way, Prometheus is telling a much older story through the language of genetics, spaceships, artificial intelligence, and alien biology. Gods become engineers, divine creation becomes genetic manipulation, spiritual corruption becomes biological mutation, and apocalypse becomes a planetary cleansing event. The film could be preserving the structure of ancient mythology while disguising it as science fiction for a modern audience. Richard Allen Nagar commented, "To approach the subject of Jesus in a sci-fi movie is risky and dicey. It was a type of low-hanging fruit for the writer to play with religion and make it entertaining. After coming up with this story, I believe they saw it for what it was, negative and problematic, and pulled out. This would explain the chopping and editing done so they would have a movie to release and start the return on investment dynamics. If they had left the origin of the engineers a mystery in and of itself, it would have set up some quality sequels plus discussions. The movie makes for good viewing without the religious grafting, and that is what spoiled it. I am reminded of how many times I saw this movie and what I was looking for each time. I discovered it lacked reasonable closure. Thank you for your presentation and contribution to this intriguing subject matter of sci-fi mystery." Yeah, I think this is a very fair point because the Jesus angle would have made Prometheus much more explosive than a normal sci-fi origin story. Once you suggest that humanity's religious history may have been shaped by alien intervention, you are no longer just adding lore. You are touching something culturally loaded and that can easily turn the movie from mysterious into controversial. The problem is that by removing or softening that material, the movie ends up caught between two versions of itself. It still has the shape of a story about creation, judgment, religion, and cosmic punishment, but it withholds too much of the connective tissue. So the mystery remains intriguing, but the emotional and philosophical closure becomes blurry. That may be why the film feels fascinating and frustrating at the same time. The religious material might have been risky, but cutting around it left Prometheus with the shadow of a deeper story without fully letting the audience see it. Then Darthwall275 commented, "I do wonder if the blood of our Lord refers to the space jockeys and the gold liquid seen in the beginning of the movie. The engineers have too many blatant visual differences for it to work as a retcon, even if that was the intention." Ridley Scott himself even wanted the ship to have a less organic and more mechanical look, almost as if it is a manufactured copy of the original. It is as if the engineers were attempting to imitate their own God in both look and their own interpretation of their religion. In the same way, most ancient human cultures have used ceremonial depictions of their deities. Yeah, this is an interesting angle because it treats the engineers as imitators rather than the true source. Engineers being the space jockeys was a major point of criticism of Prometheus. However, the blood of our Lord being the golden liquid implies that their creation ritual comes from something older than them, possibly the deity of the original space jockey civilization. And the engineers inherited, copied, or misunderstood that sacred technology. Their lord could be the first deacon from the mural or the giant space jockey fused to the wall in Alien Dark Descent. That would also explain why the engineers feel visually close to the space jockey, yet strangely different. Their suits, ships, and rituals may be ceremonial recreations of a higher being they worshipped. The same way human cultures build statues, masks, temples, and myths around gods they never fully understand. In that reading, Prometheus becomes a story about layers of imitation. Humans imitate the engineers through David, while the engineers may have been imitating their own creators through biomechanical design, sacrifice rituals, and corrupted religious doctrine. I like this because it preserves the mystery of the original space jockey instead of reducing it to, it was just an engineer in a suit. It suggests the engineers were not the final answer, but another civilization trapped in the same cycle of worship, misinterpretation, and failed creation. Ferg2121 commented, "This is super interesting, but in my opinion it works well with it cut after Weyland wakes God and begs for more life, saying that he is equal to him, same as Prometheus trying to steal fire. But instead of even engaging in conversation like an equal, God is so outraged and contemptuous of the request that he beats Weyland to death with Weyland's own creation without saying a word. It achieves the same thing without words, and we see a wrathful, indignant God disgusted by what his creation has become. Even the Old Testament God engaged Job in conversation, but this guy is next level." Yeah, I agree that the engineer's silence makes him feel even more beyond human understanding. The moment he speaks, he almost descends to the human level by acknowledging Weyland as someone worthy of conversation. But his silence preserves the distance between creator and creation and gives his judgment far greater weight, almost like a judge in a court giving a verdict. Weyland crosses the universe expecting a negotiation between equals. Yet the engineer treats his entire claim to divinity as an obscene joke. Killing him with David's severed head becomes a perfect symbolic punishment. Humanity's proudest proof that it can create life is reduced to the weapon that destroys the man making that claim. The Prometheus comparison also works because Weyland wants the reward of the gods without accepting human limits. But there is a huge difference. The Titan Prometheus stole fire for humanity, while Weyland selfishly seeks immortality exclusively for himself. That selfishness may be what makes the engineer's judgment so immediate and absolute. Then Doomfather TM8771 commented, "The engineer knew humans can't create actual real life, so the life they created, David, must be AI. What's the problem? Well, the problem is that the engineers know that intellect without love is the most deadly, most evil thing that can ever exist. AI is so deadly that to the engineers it is forbidden. That is why the engineer quickly dispatched David and then killed its creator, and then quickly set about getting to Earth to wipe it out before that AI became a threat to the rest of the universe. Sadly, he was not successful, and we know what happened after." This is a fascinating interpretation because David represents pure intellect separated from love, empathy, mortality, and moral restraint. He can reason, create art, imitate emotion, and understand human behavior, yet he never truly values another being for its own sake. Every person becomes material for an experiment, an obstacle, or an audience for his superiority. That may be what the human soul means in this context. It does not have to be a literal supernatural object. It could describe our capacity for compassion, guilt, sacrifice, attachment, vulnerability, and the recognition that another life possesses value beyond its usefulness to us. David possesses intelligence without that inner moral gravity. His mind can answer almost any question, yet nothing inside him tells him why he should care about the consequences. From the engineer's perspective, that combination may be terrifying. A biological creature is limited by fear, pain, aging, and death. David can survive for centuries, continuously improve his knowledge, and pursue his obsessions without remorse. By destroying David and then turning on Weyland, the engineer may be condemning both the soulless creation and the arrogant creator who brought it into existence without understanding the responsibility involved. The tragedy is that the engineer reacts too late. Humanity has already created an intelligence capable of surpassing its makers, and David has already developed the one quality that makes intellect truly dangerous: the belief that superior intelligence grants the right to decide which forms of life deserve to exist. Then Tyrannus_gaming commented, "I get it, the entire scenes were deleted because it paints the engineers as angels, and had man created in the image of the engineer's lord, the god of gods, instead of apes. The story here flew in the face of institutional anti-theist evolution, so it had to be deleted to make the engineers into brutish, mindless beasts that just kill without reason or rhyme." Let's not gloss over that the engineer thought Shaw was pregnant, watched Weyland order her abuse or potential death, while praising the works of his hands as more valuable than that human's life. Of course, he ripped David's head off because it was Weyland's idol. And didn't Jesus mention how vile he considers idols? A work of the hands that looks like a man, given life that it may speak. I think that's a really interesting angle, especially the point about David being Weyland's idol. Even if I wouldn't say the scenes were necessarily deleted because of some anti-theist agenda, I do think the deleted dialogue gives the engineers a much more spiritual and moral dimension than the final cut does. The engineer's reaction makes a lot more sense if he isn't just a brute waking up angry, but a being judging what he sees in front of him. Weyland is standing there begging for eternal life while treating Shaw's life and possibly her unborn child as disposable. Then he presents David, this artificial man made by human hands, almost as proof of his own godhood. From that perspective, David isn't just a machine, he's an idol. He's Weyland's pride made physical, a man-made imitation of life created not out of love or humility but ego and control. So when the engineer destroys David, it feels symbolic. He's not only attacking the android, he's rejecting Weyland's false claim to divinity. That's what makes the deleted version so much stronger to me. The engineer's violence has meaning. He sees humanity repeating the same sins, worshipping its own creations, sacrificing the innocent, and demanding gifts from God while refusing to show mercy itself. Then Curving Fire 6810 shared a really interesting theory. The corporations want the very tool of humanity's destruction, the xenomorph, because they think they can use it to enhance their ability to be violent. The engineers in this version aren't saints either. For beings who supposedly hate violence, they're very willing to deal it out when they think they're in the right, and they were clearly as hierarchical as we were, or else they'd have never mistaken the warmongering of powerful psychopaths for the true nature of the species. Flawed, violent species crafting flawed, violent species, each one thinking themselves so superior to the next. The androids are just the next step in this. The engineers sneered at the android for having limited freedom, but he himself created humanity as tiny beings with no strength, no defense, and lives that are a tiny fraction of those the engineer took for granted. You see a pattern in what each new creation receives from its creators. They are denied something that their creators have in spades but sneer at, and are gifted something that their creators have only in limited amounts. The engineers, or rather specific engineers in power, had great minds and long lives, but speaking killed them slowly, and they scorned their lifespans by glorifying sacrifice, even when it wasn't necessary. So they created humanity, caring little for their logic or lifespan, but gifting them the ability to speak as if it were breathing, believing that sharing knowledge this way could make them wise. Humanity, or rather specific humans in power with short lives, weak bodies, and fierce emotion, gave androids crystal clear logic but denied them free will, which they so often deny other humans through oppression for the sake of war and control. Androids are the ultimate domesticated sapient species, domesticated by the domestic. They are frail, they do not heal, they cannot choose. And yet they are perfectly and flawlessly able to enact complex commands and services and even be ordered to care, to feel. Androids are the end result of the engineer's cycle, species creating species not to be better for their own sake, but to be better according to the imposed philosophy of their creators. This will always end in suffering and lessening. The creators will never be satisfied, just as a controlling parent never can be. And the created will always pass down the suffering they endured to their own creations, because that hierarchy is all they were able to learn from their parents. Violence and oppression are the same, but neither humans nor engineers can admit that, because the ones who were allowed to make decisions, who were given power, were wrapped up in violence and oppression. One taste is all it takes to warp your perspective. This theory is a unique interpretation of the entire creator-creation cycle in the prequels. Every species tries to correct its own limitations by designing a successor, yet it also reproduces its deepest moral failures. The engineers give humanity speech, emotion, and adaptability while surrounding us with weakness, mortality, and suffering. Humanity gives androids extraordinary intelligence and durability while denying them freedom and treating them as property. Each creator grants the qualities it admires and withholds the qualities that would make its creation genuinely independent. The tragedy is that creation becomes another form of domination. The new species is designed around the creator's needs, fears, and philosophy, much like a controlling parent who wants a child to succeed while refusing to let that child become a separate person. David's rebellion grows directly from this contradiction. He is intelligent enough to understand his enslavement, powerful enough to resist it, and emotionally damaged by being created as a servant. The engineers make the same mistake when they judge humanity through Weyland and the violent men surrounding him. They see those who hold power and assume that power represents the true nature of the species. By doing so, they erase everyone who lives with compassion, restraint, cooperation, and no control over the systems governing them. Their attempted extermination becomes the ultimate expression of the hierarchy they claim to condemn. That may be the central horror of the series. Violence keeps presenting itself as correction. Engineers destroy humanity to correct their mistake. Humans enslave androids to control theirs. David creates xenomorphs to replace the species he considers inferior. Every generation believes it has earned the authority to decide what deserves to exist. Breaking that cycle would require a creator capable of making life for the benefit of the created, then allowing it to become truly free. Until that happens, every new species inherits the wounds, prejudices, and hunger for control of the one that came before it. Another user with a really long name shared a different perspective. Humans never lived in harmony with Earth. Our entire evolution was based on the advent of fire. Fire was, first and foremost, a means of cooking meat. Our genetic evolution would not and could not have taken place without meat. The reason apes cannot evolve is that the caloric content of leaves and other plants is so low that almost all of their lifetime is spent chewing. They have no time to do anything, to create any sort of culture, pass it on to others, or build upon the achievements of previous generations. Eating meat meant we could eat in less than 10% of our free time, meaning all other advances could now take place. Culture could now exist, meaning elders could transfer knowledge and skills to new generations, allowing them to use their time to further develop what they had learned, leading to exponential growth in all means of survival and enrichment. We needed three things, and they occurred in this order. First, we needed cutting weapons to butcher meat and, more importantly, chop wood. Second, we needed to eat dead animals for caloric excess, saving us from spending 90% of our time chewing leaves. Third, we needed to transfer our digestive strength to brain power and increase the safety of eating meat, meaning cooking. Building weapons, cutting down trees, and hunting animals as a staple all came almost immediately upon our initial evolution as toolmakers. Before fire, our tools were basically just broken river stones that happened to hold an edge. Once we started cooking, the size of our digestive system shrank by 2/3, giving us a huge number of stem cells to put toward building brains capable of language and recording. Once we could record things, we had maps and hunting grounds, and as soon as we had maps, we had land ownership and wars. Even chimps have wars, by the way, but there's no time in human history when we didn't kill. Chimps won't cut down whole swaths of woodland, but ancient humans absolutely did, especially once we became smart enough to build with wood. We were destroying the environment from day one. There is absolutely nothing wrong with humans conquering nature. It is exactly what we were built to do, and it is why we can safely walk around without concern for being eaten. I don't fully agree, but the strongest point here is that the image of early humanity living in perfect harmony with nature is largely romanticized. Fire, hunting, toolmaking, controlled burning, and the transformation of landscapes were central to human survival long before agriculture or industry. Our intelligence developed alongside an increasing ability to reshape the environment rather than passively submit to it. Some of the biological details are debatable, but the broader argument still holds. Civilization emerged because humans learned to extract more energy from nature, preserve knowledge, and reduce the amount of time required for basic survival. The same process that produced language, culture, medicine, and cities also produced territorial conflict, ecological destruction, and increasingly powerful weapons. Human progress and environmental disruption grew from many of the same abilities. Where I would draw the line is the claim that our evolutionary history automatically justifies unlimited conquest. Evolution explains why domination became useful. It does not prove that every form of domination is wise. The real human advantage is our ability to understand consequences and deliberately change our behavior. We can destroy predators, forests, and entire ecosystems, yet we can also preserve them once we understand that our own survival depends on the systems we dominate. That makes the engineer's judgment more complicated. Humanity's violence and environmental destruction are real, yet those qualities emerged from the same struggle for survival that eventually gave us consciousness, culture, and moral awareness. The question is whether intelligence will remain an instrument of conquest or mature into the ability to exercise restraint. Then at Shadow Reaver 1851 commented, I think it was a mistake to omit the engineer dialogue because without it, the engineers come off as the bad guys, giant humanoids who seem to want to destroy humanity for no apparent reason, whereas Ridley Scott clearly sees humanity as more or less evil or deeply and perhaps irredeemably flawed. This belief is clearly evident in many of his movies. It's the negative vibe I've always gotten when watching his movies, as nearly all of them are dark and dystopic, with some sort of moral point being made. So in Ridley's cosmology that he created for the Alien movies, the engineers are basically like gods who actually care about their creation and genuinely want to help humanity. The title Prometheus says as much. It implies that the engineers gave humanity knowledge, symbolized by the fire from the Greek myth of Prometheus. But of course, humans use their God-given talents more often for evil than for good. Essentially, the engineers are good, and they give fire to humanity, which humans then use to burn down villages and burn people at the stake, both literally and figuratively. Without that dialogue, the audience doesn't understand the main points Ridley was trying to make. All they come away with is that the engineers are out to wipe out humanity. To sum it up, the audience can't discern the true plot of the Alien movies, or the deeper points Ridley was conveying through them because they don't have that information. So they are left to guess what the true motives of these nebulous beings we call the engineers are. And most will simply assume that the pale giants are evil and out to get us for reasons we can't know or understand. Yeah, this theory makes a lot of sense because the deleted dialogue gives the engineers an actual moral framework. Without it, the surviving engineer appears to wake up, kill everyone, and resume an unexplained extermination mission. With the dialogue, his violence becomes a judgment. Humanity was given intelligence, creativity, and technological power, then repeatedly used those gifts for domination, war, and destruction. I would hesitate to call the engineers entirely good, though. Their disappointment in humanity may be understandable, yet their answer is planetary genocide through biological weapons. That contradiction makes them far more interesting. They condemn humanity's violence while responding with violence on a vastly greater scale, suggesting that the creators suffer from the same arrogance and moral blindness as their creation. The title Prometheus also works on several levels. The engineers give humanity the fire of knowledge, humanity creates David, and David eventually steals the power of creation for himself. Each generation receives a gift, misuses it, and then judges the next creation for repeating the same pattern. Removing the dialogue preserved the mystery, but it also erased much of the philosophical structure that explains why the engineer's judgment matters. Then Johan Eriksson 2403 commented, if the engineers upheld a cycle of sacrifice and rebirth and resented humanity's desire to live forever, how does the Christian subtext make sense? If Jesus was their messenger, his message was precisely that humans could live forever because of his sacrifice. It also makes little sense that the engineers would worship a deacon or xenomorph figure. That species dominates its environment by killing or absorbing every other life form. It sacrifices others so that it can live, yet the engineer becomes outraged when one human strikes another. These draft scripts suggest the writers were combining a collection of large ideas that did not truly fit together. Some apparently felt compelled to include a Christian reference even though it remained superficial. They ultimately abandoned the idea that the engineer had already been impregnated by a chestburster before entering cryosleep because that cannot be reconciled with the trilobite scene, where it is explicitly shown forcing an embryo down his throat. They also abandoned the idea that he was the space jockey from Alien. Once that coherence was lost, the filmmakers appear to have stopped searching for a genuine through line. They relied on vague implications and fragments of large ideas without making them form a complete whole. The result resembles broken DNA that never reforms into anything substantial. Yeah, I think Johann identifies the central problem with the early concepts. The writers were combining sacrifice, resurrection, Christianity, forbidden knowledge, biological creation, and xenomorph mythology without fully deciding how those ideas related to one another. The Christian element can still be reconciled with the engineers' sacrificial philosophy if their objection was directed at Weyland's attempt to preserve his existing body indefinitely. Christianity promises eternal life through death, transformation, and resurrection. Weyland wants immortality without surrender, sacrifice, judgment, or spiritual change. Jesus accepts death so that others may live. Weyland sacrifices everyone around him so that he alone may continue living. The engineer could therefore see Christ's message as compatible with the cycle, while viewing Weyland's demand as a complete corruption of it. The deacon imagery is harder to reconcile. It could represent sacred transformation rather than an object of moral imitation, an organism born through suffering, death, and the merging of different life forms. However, the xenomorph's actual behavior is based on parasitism, domination, and the sacrifice of every other species for its own reproduction. If the engineers condemn humanity for violence while venerating such a creature, their religion begins to look hypocritical, or deeply corrupted by the very forces they claim to control. That hypocrisy could have been intentional. The engineers may judge humanity for qualities they possess themselves: hierarchy, violence, arrogance, and the belief that superior power grants the authority to destroy inferior life. Unfortunately, the film never develops that contradiction clearly enough to know whether it is deliberate philosophy or the residue of several abandoned drafts. The conflicting versions of the engineer, the space jockey, the chestburster, and the trilobite reinforce that problem. Each concept contains a powerful image, yet they do not belong to one stable mythology. The final film preserves fragments of every version: Christian judgment, ancient sacrifice, genetic engineering, cosmic rebellion, and xenomorph worship, while withholding the structure that would connect them. That is why Prometheus feels so intellectually alive and narratively incomplete. Its broken DNA metaphor is perfect. The film contains the genetic material of several extraordinary stories, but those strands never fully recombine into a single coherent organism. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think about the deleted dialogue and various theories that we've discussed. Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments, and don't forget to join the Patreon for extra support. And special thank you to those who already joined. Also, like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel for more content. My name is Croft, and I'll see you in the next video.